member of both the weather interpretation and the colliery chores, which flew into forest fires to gather coals for the forge of Bubo the blacksmith, Soren had learned his abilities directly from the master. And though Ezylryb was a stern master, often grouchy and suffering no nonsense, he was, of all the ribs, the most fiercely devoted to his students and his chore members. The chores were the small teams into which the owls were organised. In the chores they learned a particular skill that was vital to the survival of not just the owls of Ga'Hoole, but to all the kingdoms of owls. Ezylryb led two chores, weathering and collierying. But for all his gruff ways, he was certainly not above cracking a joke, sometimes very dirty jokes, much to the horror of Ottolissa, a spotted owl, who was just Soren's age and quite prim and proper and was given to airs. Ottolissa was always carrying on about her ancient and distinguished ancestors. One of her favourite words was appalling. She was constantly being appalled by Ezylryb's crudeness, his lack of refinement, his coarse ways, and Ezylryb was constantly telling Ottolissa to give it a blow. This was the most impolite way an owl could tell another to shut up. The two bickered constantly, and yet Ottolissa had turned into a good chore member, and that was all that really counted to Ezylryb. But now there was no more bickering, no more crude jokes, no more climbing the baggy wrinkles, flying upside down in the gutter, punching the wind and popping the scuppers, doing the hurly-burly and all the wonderful manoeuvres the owls did when they flew through gales and storms and even hurricanes in the weather interpretation chore. Life seemed flat without Ezylryb, the night less black, the stars dull, even as this comet, like a great raw gash in the sky, ripped apart the dawn. "Some say a comet's an omen." Soren felt the branch he was perched on quiver. "Octavia!" The fat old nestmaid snake slithered out onto the branch. "What are you doing out here?" Soren asked. "Same thing as you, looking for Ezylryb." She sighed. But of course Octavia, like all nestmaid snakes who tidied up the hollows of owls and kept them free of vermin, was blind. In fact, she had no eyes, just two small indentations where eyes should be. But nestmaids were renowned for their extraordinary sensory skills. They could hear and feel things that other creatures could not. So, if there were wing beats out there, wing beats that had the sound peculiar to those of Ezylryb, she would know. Although owls were silent flyers, each stirred the air with its wings in a unique fashion that only a nest-made snake could detect. And Octavia, with her musical background and years in the Harp Guild under Madame Plonk's guidance, was especially keen to all sorts of vibrations. The Harp Guild was one of the most prestigious of all the guilds for which the blind nest-made snakes were chosen to belong. Dear Mrs. Plithifer, who had served in Soren's family as Hollow, and with whom he had been miraculously reunited, was also a member of this guild. The snakes wove themselves in and out of the harp strings, playing the accompaniment for Madame Plonk, the beautiful snowy owl with the shimmering voice. Octavia had served as a nestmate for Madame Plonk and Ezylryb. Indeed, she and Ezylryb had arrived at the great Ga'Hoole tree together from the land of the North Waters of the Northern Kingdoms years and years ago. She was completely devoted to Ezylryb, and although she had never said much about how she and the old screech owl had first met, there were rumours that she had been rescued by Ezylryb, and that she, unlike the other snakes, had not been born blind. Something had happened to make her go blind. She certainly did not have the same rosy scales as the other snakes. She was instead a pale greenish-blue. The old snake sighed again. "I just don't understand," Soren said. "He's too smart to get lost." Octavia shook her head. "I don't think his